very big, fluffy bun.
Where's the beef?
Some hamburger places give you a lot less beef on a lot of bun.
Where's the beef?
You know, it made for a pretty funny commercial, but when you really get right down to it, the question itself is kind of a little silly. Beef and meat of all sorts are all around us, on restaurant menus, in the bag of your drive-through dinner, floating past you in the back of an 18-wheeler on the highway at 65 miles per hour, still breathing at that time, of course. So rather than ask, where's the beef? I think we should ask, why is the beef? Okay, maybe the phrasing on that is a little off, but I think you know what I mean. It's no doubt that even in 2021, with plenty of evidence that global consumption of meat is growing to unhealthy and possibly unsustainable levels, the vast majority of people in developed, wealthy nations eat meat of some form almost every meal of the day. Now, before I go any further, I want to be quite clear lest I lose some of you right off the bat. This video is not designed to promote veganism. Some of this data may cause you to think about your eating habits or potentially even change some of them. But my sole purpose is to answer the question of why we eat meat and so much of it. Got it? Good. So let's start with the raw, no pun intended, data, and then explore the history and causal factors. By the way, I'll have links in the description to the sources for all of this data and have made every effort to be as accurate and fair as possible in my research and in the creation of this video. Currently, we, the global population, are consuming about 350 million tons of meat annually. That's tons, not pounds. Do the math and your head may start to spin from all the zeros. Not surprisingly, the US leads the way in consumption per person at a whopping 275 pounds per capita annually. That's 3/4 of a pound of meat per day for everyone in the US. And that's even taking into account that there's a growing portion of people in the US that don't eat meat at all. So it's no stretch to say that potentially the average person who does consume meat in America is eating more than a pound per day, which when you get right down to it is not only kind of mind-boggling, but expensive too. We'll get on to that more later. So we'll round out the top 5 meat eateries per capita with Australia, Argentina, New Zealand, and Spain, all clocking in at 220 pounds per capita annually or higher. You probably think all of this happens because of cattle and chickens being raised at huge ranches or facilities in the Midwest, or at least I did. I love the pioneer woman. But no, chances are there are poultry, cattle, and pig farms in your state and depending on climate, in your county even. I mean, they have to be. Get this, 72 billion animals are slaughtered for our consumption each year. 95% of these are chickens.
Do the chickens have large talons?
Along with about 300 million head of cattle and 1.5 billion pigs. The production of meat has doubled in my lifetime, that's since about 1988, and barring some major changes, is predicted to continue to rise. Why? Well, meat is expensive to produce and therefore to buy, but global average earnings have tripled over the last 50 years, and thus people's ability, at least in moderately wealthy to very wealthy nations, to afford meat has increased as well. So what's driving these carnal desires? Well, for starters, it's wired into our DNA. Archaeological sites in Africa dating to some 2 to 2.5 million years ago show evidence of crude stone tools and animal bones that are indications where damage was done to the bones with said tools. So, even our hominid ancestors were doing it, and sapiens were no different. We've just clearly gotten a bit better at it over the years. Now, compared to our ancestors, our brains are quite a bit larger.
Check out the big brain on bread!
And many anthropologists and evolutionary biologists think it's no surprise that once we started eating the calorie and protein-rich meat, we were able to produce more energy to support a growing brain. Obviously, this happened over thousands of years, but the timing in the historical record indicates a correlation, if not direct causation, between human ancestors eating meat and the increase in our eventual brain size. So, eating meat may literally be what allowed modern humans to exist and build the advanced society and technological world we inhabit today. But today, most of us have more than ample access to food and water, and don't necessarily need to eat meat for subsistence purposes. We do it because we like it, but there's more to look at here as well. Fast forward a bit, not in the video, but like to the 17th, 18th century, we'll say. Colonists in the New World were shocked to find almost limitless fertile land that could support the raising of ruminants and other livestock. Not many were present initially, but with every trip from the homeland, more were imported and bred. Now, of course, before refrigeration, you didn't have a whole lot of options for preserving meat, so it was often cured, smoked, pickled, or dried if not used in relatively short order. For this reason, and the fact that in lean years or harsh winters, who knew where the next meal would come from, almost all parts of the animal were used for efficiency. But by the early 20th century, we had developed ways to preserve meat that didn't require so dramatically altering its taste or texture, and thus offal and less desirable cuts became scrapped or turned into other products. We've advanced this to the point where literal prime cuts line the shelves of local grocery stores in many cities today, and you can order things like fancy Japanese Wagyu A5 on the internet, if you've got a considerable amount of money. There's a cultural aspect to our meat mania as well. So like I live in the South, right? And anyone around here knows what a meat in 3 plate is. You get a choice of meat and then 3 sides. It's not 3 sides and then some meat thrown in, it's meat. And then these 3 other things on the plate. We know which item has the starring role. Think about other iconic cultural or regional dishes that are basically just meat and some other food. Fish and chips, steak and eggs, bangers and mash, steak and potatoes, burgers and fries, wings and beer. Is beer a food? I think beer's a food. Or think about it this way. What's the centerpiece at almost any catered event or buffet? No one's eagerly rooting around for the kale and walnut salad or the Brussels sprouts. Well, almost no one. It's a roast, right? Or it's the Kahlua pig at a luau. Or it's burgers, wings, and hot dogs at a cookout. Turkeys and hams at holiday gatherings. So, obviously, we are gobbling up the meat, and we know evolutionarily why, and we know why we eat so much good meat, and we don't necessarily need to eat it to have a balanced diet. So what gives? What's still driving this forward? Have you ever heard of the National Pork Board? No? Well, you've of course heard of pork, right? And how it's the other white meat. The Pork Board is who's behind that. You may be surprised to find that such an unusual board even exists. The National Pork Board, pork, is a program sponsored by the United States Department of Agriculture and Agricultural Marketing Services, whose purpose is to provide consumer information, perform industry-related research, and promote pork as a food product. Okay, so why? Why is our government getting involved in what I eat or should eat for dinner? This is literally a group of people who are trying to increase pork consumption in America, and their propaganda or information, whatever you want to call it, is funded, you guessed it, by subsidies from every pig that's killed. And if you think this is a unique idea just in the pork industry, you'd be wrong, and quite frankly at this point, a bit naive. Ever since the 1985 Congressional Farm Bill, just about every crop and livestock that is farmed or raised in the US has had their own board for similar purposes. So yes, in a way, you eat meat because the government is telling you to. Put that in your pipe and smoke it, libertarians. Now, to be clear, that's not the only reason, but a ton of money is spent every year in this country to advertise or suggest, whether directly or sometimes even subliminally, that you should be eating meat. And like we said at the outset, in a sense, we're conditioned from a young age to desire it and even expect meat on the table. We're wealthy. It's a birthright. And it's good for you. Or so we're told. But you have to be careful there because, of course, the people whose very livelihood depends on you buying their hogs will tout all the lean protein and vitamins and minerals in their piggy product. And at the end of the day, or the beginning of it, the choice of what to put in your mouth is your own. And likely it's an almost unconscious decision at this point, given the frequency with which we humans eat. And that decision very likely includes meat, unless for some very specific and personal reason you have elected for it not to. And that choice is driven by millions of years of evolutionary history, cultural pressures, and yes, political pressure as well. But at least now you know why. Why isn't it doing whoosh? Hold on. Okay, so I think we answered the question of the video. And by all means, cut right here if you feel like you've gotten all the information that you want or need from this video. But with all of the research and studying that I did to make this, There's a couple things that I feel like I can't, in good conscience, not mention about the consumption of meat currently in the world. So again, stop if you want to, but I just have a couple final thoughts for you, my viewers. Meat. Why it might not be what's for dinner in 2050. The best available evidence we have right now, again from numerous sources, is that at our current trajectory, we simply cannot feed the growing population of the planet while consuming meat at the same rate we are now or are projected to reach. If the entire global population ate meat at the same rate as the United States, we could only produce enough food for about 3 billion people. Not meat, food. That's because compared to rice, grain, legumes, or veggies, animal protein is wildly inefficient to raise, feed, and process. And cranking out that much cow and chicken would simply take more resources than we currently possess. Something has to give, as the saying goes. And look, perhaps new synergies and efficiencies in animal husbandry will yield more efficient livestock farming. And look, I certainly am not here trying to advocate for putting hundreds of thousands of farmers that raise animals out of jobs. This is an extraordinarily complex issue that's going to take honest conversations and much smarter minds than mine to navigate. But for now, here's my advice. And look, I'm not a doctor or an expert, I just play a cooking guy on TV, so take it for what you will with a coarse grain of sea salt. If you eat an omnivorous diet, look to integrate more sustainable seafood in place of things like red meat. Pick a day or two each week to go meatless and just leave the meat off the menu. Experiment with plant-based sources like quinoa, lentils, beans, and nuts that are high in proteins. And if your brain is wired like mine to think that every meal should be a meat and 3 plate, work on consciously trying to rewire that. Because unless some of us start implementing some of these changes, one day in the future, we might finding us really asking, where's the beef?